Welcome back to Inside the Plant, brought to you by United Prairie, your source for real world agronomy insights, fertilizer updates, and conversations with the people out there in the field making it happen every day. I'm Josh Rund, and today's episode is all about Sidedress strategies and maximizing nitrogen efficiency post emergence. Today, I'm joined by United Prairie sales agronomist Anthony Conn. Anthony, thanks for taking the time to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your role here at United Prairie, and some of the experience you've built around side dressing over the years.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Well, to start with, I'm 47 years old. I was born and raised on a grain and livestock farm in central Illinois that I'm still part of today. And I have a degree in crop science from the University of Illinois. I'm also a CCA, Certified Crop Advisor, and I've been working in ag retail for over 25 years now. I've dealt with side dress in multiple different forms, from anhydrous ammonia to UAN bars, wide drop, and even urea application.
Awesome. So Anthony's got experience. And that's what we're looking for when we bring professionals in on this podcast. So, Anthony, before we dive in, I want to take a moment to shout out to one of our listeners and one of our young growers out there named Cooper J. Cooper, after our last podcast, reached out and had some questions or thought that this side dress topic was something that would interest some people. And so some of the questions that we've got here today have come from what Cooper responded to. So if you're listening out there and you have a topic or you have a question about something that we're doing at United Prairie or about ag retail in general and agronomy, always feel free to send us a message or contact us. We're happy to put that question on air and give it an answer for you. So the first section we're going to talk about, Anthony, is just kind of the basics. And one of the questions Cooper had, or one thing he thought would be interesting to talk about, is what options do growers have when it comes to side dress? So talking about 32 anhydrous, what are the differences and how can each of them be effective in their own right?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question to start with. 32% anhydrous ammonia are probably the two most popular nitrogen products we use for side dress in our area. Let me first start with anhydrous ammonia. Anhydrous ammonia, NH3, also as it's called, is 82% nitrogen, and when applied to the soil, it rapidly attaches to soil moisture and forms NH4, or ammonium. Ammonium is relatively safe from leaching, and it's also plant available. When the soil temperature is above 50 degrees, nitrification can speed up and converts that ammonium to a leachable form of nitrate, or NO3. That is also plant available, but it's no longer stable or safe in the soil for long term. When we look at 32%, it is made up of three forms of nitrogen. 50% of that nitrogen is in the urea form, 25% is in the ammonium or NH4 form, and the last 25% is in the nitrate form. The urea form is very soluble and can move freely with water. Urea will react with the water and change to actually NH3 and then NH4 or ammonium again. NH4 is also subject to converting to NO3 like it was with anhydrous. Both 32% anhydrous ammonia are effective forms of side dress and plant available forms in the NH4 or ammonium or nitrate form. However, the plant stage and field conditions are more particular and for proper application of anhydrous ammonia.
All right. So, Anthony, one thing you did mention in there is when it's available to the plant. And so how much of this nitrogen are we realistically losing before a side dress application? And what can be done to protect, I guess, what we've already put in there? Because a lot of times farmers will split an application. They'll do some in the fall, do some in the spring, and then they'll do some side dress on top of it. How are we ensuring that that nitrogen is still sitting there from even if we did it back in October or November of the previous year?
Okay, so the amount of nitrogen that we would realistically lose before side dress, that's a hard question to answer because it can change with the season, with the amount of rainfall we have, with the conditions when the nitrogen was applied first off. It will be different for every field and every soil type as well. We can do our best to minimize those losses by using the proper stabilizers and also by applying in the correct soil conditions when the nitrogen will seal correctly and using the right product for the right time of the year too.
So that's great information. Once again, one common theme you're always going to hear in agriculture, I'm glad Anthony mentioned it, is the weather. The weather is a driving force in agriculture, whether we're planting, putting on fertilizer, putting on things like anhydrous ammonia. Weather conditions can dictate how well things go and how well things hold in our soils here. So I'm glad Anthony mentioned that as we went through. And so let's talk, Anthony, a little bit about timing too, because it's not just weather. And so when is the ideal window to side dress nitrogen, and how flexible is that timing? Once again, we talked about weather and other conditions. How flexible can we be?
Okay. Yeah, we know how the nitrogen demand curve is, how it works. It ramps up during the season. Basically, from about V8 to pollination is the largest demand in the plant for nitrogen. But having said that, I like to begin side dress at V3, if at all possible. I like to go on the earlier side because I want that nitrogen there before that occurs, before that big ramp up in demand. And so saying that, I'd like to finish up by V7, if at all possible. If you're using an applicator from United Prairie, there are typically multiple growers who use those applicators too. So it's not advantageous to wait until the last moment to call in for that applicator, say at V5 or V6 even. I like to know that I can get my nitrogen on timely, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to get it on before we get into that demand curve. So planning to start early also allows for delays in weather events if we get a big rain. And also, when you start side dressing early, the corn plants themselves will bounce back better from just the equipment turning on the ends and so forth, and recover a lot better there too. So in my mind, I like the nitrogen there, so it's there when the plant is starting to determine its yield potential, which typically occurs about V6, V7. So if we have our nitrogen there, that plant knows it's got that, it's happy, and hopefully we'll have higher potential for us too throughout the season.
All right, great. So once again, talking with Anthony Conn here about side dress application and when's the right timing, when's the best time to do it. And once again, going back to early, we talk about custom application, we talk about getting equipment out in the field, starting things early because you never know if the equipment's going to be available, especially like Anthony said, if you're renting equipment from United Prairie. In the weather, you never know what the weather or the rest of the season's going to turn out to be. And so if you want to sit there and wait until you think it's the exact optimum time, a lot of times the weather and equipment don't cooperate with optimum timing. So I'm glad Anthony mentioned that as we go through. And so Anthony, I guess talking about that and how we adjust, how do you think growers should adjust their side dress plans based on the weather, especially if you run into seasons where it's overly wet or similar we had at the start of this year, some that are a little bit drier conditions too. How should a farmer adjust side dress plans with that weather condition?
Yeah, so we need to be very mindful of the field conditions and in order to properly apply that nitrogen. Excessive wet conditions can cause issues with sealing, whether that be with the anhydrous ammonia bar or with the liquid UAN bar. If it happens to dry out after that UAN is applied, those slits can then open up again. And that's not really something we like to see. We like to see that nitrogen covered in the soil. And of course, anhydrous, if it's not sealing correctly, you're not getting it all in the soil either. So, and also, wet conditions too can lead to compaction. And, for instance, there may be enough nitrogen in that soil from your application, but if there's compaction limiting the roots to get to that, or also limiting drainage from future rain events, that can cause problems too. So we just want to make sure that the field conditions are proper. The 32% applicators cause less soil disturbance, so you can get by a little bit more with those as far as damp conditions, but again, you don't want it muddy when you're out there doing that. Anhydrous is a little more particular on if it's too dry, too wet, soil tilth, how it seals, so we got to be a little bit pickier with the anhydrous bars. So stabilizers can also be used with side dress and are becoming more popular with the cost of the nitrogen products today. and I think they're a worthy investment.
Gotcha. So talking about stabilizers, because typically we only use stabilizers well around here in the fall, right? We're using Inserve or some kind of product like that in the fall. Anthony, from what you've seen, are you seeing the benefit to adding a stabilizer in to a side dress application, especially if we look at the weather conditions and what the soil is like during the specific time of year?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think I'm seeing nitrogen starting to be applied a little bit earlier for side dress applications. And I think anytime you're going to put out there a little bit earlier, like if you start at V3, a stabilizer is definitely going to protect it there from changing into that leachable form that I talked about earlier. Because the last thing we want to do is put it out there and then have it leach and not be there for our plant too. So stabilizer is a inexpensive way to protect your investment.
Awesome. Great. And I guess what are some other tools, Anthony, like we talk about? I see Kyle Meese out all the time with soil testing and doing tissue testing and maybe running some models, growing models throughout the season. Do those things help make side dress decisions?
They can, yeah. But I will say that soil testing, it's going to be a little bit different in every part of the field as far as where your nitrogen is already in that soil. It's a good tool to use, like say if a person is using manure or another organic source of fertilizer that carries nitrogen with it, you can measure how much is actually coming from that form. And but again, it's going to take some time to get those results back. Tissue testing also can help aid in your decisions, but at the same time, like I said there before, the nitrogen may be in the soil. Maybe there's another limiting factor why the plant isn't getting to it. So you may know that it's limited, but for instance, that might not be the solution to go apply more nitrogen on that crop. So the models are good to a certain extent, but also some of those look at things on a larger scale too. And I think in my mind, it's always more important to look at a farm specifically because you know that farm better than anyone else. You know the yield history, what that farm's capable of, what its limiting factors are too. So every model, has its limitations on how precise it can look at that. And even if you're using like the MRTN calculators, for instance, those look at it at a regional level. And so again, I think you still need to take that information, but not rely on it as gospel always.
Gotcha. Yeah. So paying attention to your specific farm is going to give you better results
Yes.
than at the end. Awesome. Yeah. Great. And I guess, Anthony, thinking about methods and equipment that we use, because you talked earlier in your introduction about how you've got experience with Y drops and things like that. So, what application method, Anthony, are you seeing that works best right now? Is it the knife in? Is it a Y drop? How do things like that compare to getting nitrogen to the soil in a side dress application?
Sure. So I prefer actually getting the nitrogen in the soil with a knife in, whether that be an anhydrous bar or today's liquid bars also run knives too. So to me, that gets it in the soil, gets it in moisture, gets it where it needs to be, and protects it too, also from things like volatilization. And so, Y drops can work. If I'm looking at Y drops, usually I'm thinking of those as more of an option for a later season catch-up type scenario or add extra type scenario. But I'd say 99% of the time, my side dress, I'm going to put out between V3 and V7, like I said before, and I want to knife that in.
All right, awesome. So talking about side dress application, your one thing, and this is something that Cooper J brought up as well when he sent me the direct message, was talking about strip till. Strip till seems to be a pretty popular item. It's been kind of popular over the last few years with folks. What does strip till, how does that work into this? And what should growers consider if they're thinking about starting or going into strip till?
Great question. So actually, on our own farm, we've been strip tilling and side dressing for 25 years now. And basically, I haven't seen any issues arise from that. In your early part of strip till, you do have a little more residue, it seems like you're dealing with. But after that system gets going, the biology breaks that down. And we have not had any issues side dressing. We've done both UAN and anhydrous ammonia. So, and we've even done corn on corn. Majority of our acres are rotated. So that, of course, is going to be the easier to side dress, but even the corn on corn, we did not have any issues. But it is something to consider there at the same time. And just like, whether you're talking about doing strips and then freshening and putting in more nitrogen in those strips in the spring, you just need to take into account, it wouldn't be any different than if you're planting in the conventional till ground and applying nitrogen or a starter with the plant or two. You need to take into account all sources of nitrogen there and just factor that into your overall nitrogen goal.
Awesome. Good. Because when I was growing up and working here early on at United Prairie, when strip till, we were starting to do some of that with our growers from a retailer's perspective. One of the challenges that I thought we had was your strip till bar is supposed to match up with your planter. And so it was hard for a retailer to have strip till bars to match up to every grower's planter, or to have one that was available to all of our growers too. Because I'm assuming the strip till bar you have is yours and you own it on your farm.
That's correct. And actually we run a 12-row bar and a 24-row planter. So it does not match completely, but yeah, with technology, it can work.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great. That's great information. Not a lot of people know about strip till, especially if they're kind of way outside of the agricultural world or aren't digging into that technology right now. So I think it's good to bring that to the forefront a little bit here. And so we've been talking about side dress application, different ways to do it, different techniques and when to do it. And let's talk about maybe some best practices or some common mistakes, Anthony, you've seen in your 25 years in ag retail. I guess, Anthony, in your opinion, what's the biggest mistake that you see growers make when it comes to side dressing nitrogen?
Yeah, again, I think like what I alluded to earlier, planning ahead and starting a little bit on the earlier side is the best thing a guy can do, because I have seen years where, we've waited, we've been taught in a way to wait to side dress that nitrogen because it's not needed necessarily until late season. And we've waited too long, and then we catch a rain event or a storm event with wind even, and then we've got tall corn out there that's leaning or not able to get the bar across the field and have it seal well, and looking for backup options. And years ago, there weren't the backup options like there are today with even urea and Y-drop. Those things weren't around when I started necessarily for tall corn. But I'd say that'd be the biggest mistake. We need to make a plan ahead and stick to that plan, and just have it in our mind. Once that corn gets a certain size, we need to have communication with our sales agronomist or advisor, and that is key. You just need to communicate and make sure, like I said, if you're using one of our bars or applicators, that you're thinking and let them know that you will be needing it before too long too. Just planning for everyone helps.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, I think that's great. Planning ahead is another thing that's kind of been a common theme in our last few podcast episodes as well. And once again, making that plan and sticking to that plan is something that's been brought up now multiple times. And so, Anthony, what I guess now we talked about kind of some of the mistakes and issues you've seen over the years. Some of your best performing growers who are doing things, in your opinion, and seeing the success from doing things a little more innovatively or the right way, what are your best performing growers doing differently when it comes to like their overall nitrogen strategy?
I'd say my best, most better performing growers are dialing in their nitrogen programs the best they can by farm. They're paying attention to how a farm produces, maybe even sections of the farm and how it produces, and really dialing in that program. They're using split applications for their nitrogen, and they're also using the stabilizers at the same time.
Awesome. Great. And so kind of getting to the close here, Anthony, I've really learned a lot here. I've been around agriculture my whole life, worked at United Prairie now for 12 years, but Anthony is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to nitrogen application and side dress. So I'm learning just as much, I feel like, as our listeners are going to here, and I love it. So Anthony, before we get off here, Is there one thing that you would like for a grower to walk away from this conversation knowing, or maybe doing differently this season? What do you think that would be? What's the take home from you here with this conversation?
Yeah, my takeaway on this is, again, work closely with your sales agronomist or trusted advisor on what realistic goals you have for yield and what side dress rates you should be looking at by farm. That, of course, will give you the best return on investment. At United Prairie, we want to do the best job we can for you and not cause you to spend extra money, but we want you to make the most money that you possibly can. Stay positive as well and stick to your plan. I've seen seasons where it turns off horribly dry at side dress timing, and we're starting to get a little bit of dry spell right now, but don't give up. Don't give up on that crop, because as we've seen the last couple years, the corn and bean crop can take a lot of dry weather and still come out with some very, very good yields. So we don't want to limit ourselves by thinking that crop's going to be a failure, so then therefore we cut costs. We want to stay firm in our plan, stay positive, and work with your advisor to do the best job you can.
Awesome. That's great advice. And we've talked about that before too. Our genetics are resilient. And we've had a few challenging seasons that have really tested the genetics of our seed and our crop, and they still perform exceptionally well, even in drought or even wet conditions. Once again, this has been really educational for me and hopefully for everybody listening. Anthony, we genuinely appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today and coming in, taking time out of your day. I know it's busy out there. It's a beautiful day. And we've got equipment all over the place. And so as a note to our community, you're still going to continue to see equipment, tractors, toolbars, and tanks moving all across the countryside. Even though our planters have kind of stopped or getting close to stopping, that's when the retailers really pick up and start moving. So please be patient and be cautious when you approach United Prairie or any other ag equipment on the roadway, and make sure you're sharing the road with us just like we want to do with you. And once again, and for everybody listening, this is exactly what Inside the Plant's about. Real conversations, real decisions, and real insights from the people that deliver it in the field. Thank you for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone else out there that you know. We'll be back soon as we go through kind of in-season crop checks. I'm still going to talk with Casey Hedinger about how planting season went for him and their farm. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Inside the Plant, all brought to you by United Prairie.